Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another SecureAF Podcast. I am your host, Donovan Farrow. So good to see you humans again. I feel like it's been a while. I have the guest here, Tanner Shinn.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so we have had a few requests about different topics. We do, at our group, deal with a lot of ransomware teams and advanced persistent threat, APTs, when it comes to companies getting breached. So a lot of people want to know kind of like, how does that actually go down? Are there actual real negotiations? Do you actually talk to hackers? All that cool stuff, and kind of maybe some do's and don'ts. We're going to talk about some of the news stuff that's come out, some good classic attacks. We're going to talk about, kind of going into the future. How exactly do we plan out to protect? Like, is this, I feel like it may be a time, I'll probably ask Tanner that later, is are we winning? Are we losing? As we said in our other podcast, it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. The criminals get smarter, the technology gets smarter, the criminals get smarter, and that's kind of the bounce back we have for that. So kind of just jumping in, I would like to just kind of talk about just ransomware in general. Tanner, would you like to kind of give us a top-down approach so we can have a full reach of the audience? What exactly is an advanced persistent threat, and what does that mean for cybersecurity?
Yeah, well, I would kind of separate, ransomware and APT even.
Yep.
So, I mean, if we're focusing on ransomware, because a lot of the times with an APT, you're talking about nation-state actors. You're talking about people who are really targeting a specific business. You're talking about somebody who wants to drill down into that one target to get something. They have a target, they have a goal. With ransomware, most of the time, it's shotgun approach, more like nuke from orbit approach. They're going for everything, and they're going to take the low-hanging fruit. Now, they may have some, these are on our target list. We want these guys, but it's definitely, it seems like the majority of what they're still doing is low-hanging fruit. So not that they're not capable of being APTs, but I would say the majority of them are not acting in that function the majority of the time.
Yeah. Oh, I would. So, would you say that APTs typically, you said nation state, or is it there a blend there?
Well, yeah, it's a blend. There's some that are. There's even for hire APT groups that have been documented. There's North Korea, China. They all have their own APT groups. Russia has APT groups.
Do we have any APT? I feel like we always get left out.
Yeah, it's called the NSA.
It's called the NSA. Now we're getting the spice 2 minutes in. Let's go. So the answer is yes, but no. I've heard they're really good. That's what the Iranians are allowed to acknowledge. So I guess kind of going to that. So we have the APT. We kind of talked about that would be more, we would say more organized crime, right? And then ransomware, would you say that's kind of more of a shotgun approach on the internet?
Well, no, I would still call them organized crime.
Okay.
They're just not as they just take low hanging fruit is the real thing that is why I'm hesitating to call them persistent threat. Like when I think of an APT, I think of they're doing phishing campaigns, they're doing spear phishing campaigns on a target. They're scanning on a target, looking for things. Every time they stand up a new system, they're immediately checking it to see if it's not patched. They're poking their cloud stuff, and they're really like, I want to target, Alias. If I wanted to hack Alias, what would I do? I'd start researching you. I'd start researching, your the chief of staff. I'd start researching everybody here to try to figure out who can I target.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a lot of APT stuff.
So would you say
like spear phishing campaigns?
Okay.
But if I wanted to make money as a ransomware actor, I'd fire up, some nuclei scripts. I'd fire up Aort, and I'd start going real wide. What can I exploit? New exploit drops, cool. Can I get a working POC quickly? If I can, that's money. Fire it out. What can we do? If you can do some, subdomains, if you can steal some subdomains or something like that,
right?
Which I just did on a pen test yesterday. That's still a very real thing, guys. Don't let your subdomains be taken over.
That's pretty cool. There was also another strange attack I heard that we had like a spear phishing, but it was like it spoofed the return from the Outlook internal address, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. I was like, oh, I haven't heard. That's like a super old one. It still exists.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It totally worked. Totally. That's fine. So, go ahead.
So
you're on a roll. I just cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good. So for ransomware, what I'm doing is I would then just phish everybody, right?
Yeah.
So really, really wide phishing. If you can make a targeted one, cool. Hit everybody in the company that you can. Hit every company that you can.
Yeah.
If you can get something like a subdomain that looks industry specific, let's say if I got something Vegas.com, it looks like a casino thing.
Right.
It might target MGM and Caesars.
I could see someone wanting to do that.
Yeah.
So I guess when we're on that note, let's yeah. So part of that, which I thought was pretty cool. Obviously, it's not exciting. People get if they lost their jobs, all that stuff. But the technology and the strategy against that is very intellectually exciting. I guess on that note, I'm sure you're aware of how it happened. Would you like to kind of explain that for the audience?
Sure. So MGM, I think everybody listening probably knows that they got owned pretty hard. The actors who did it were very public about everything that happened. They said they looked up an employee on LinkedIn. They pretended to be that person.
Thanks, LinkedIn.
Called the help desk, and after a 10-minute conversation, they were in. We don't know exactly how. It could have been recovery questions.
Yeah.
It could have just been straight social engineering of, no, I need you to reset my password and I lost my phone. I don't have two-factor. It could have been.
I guess we were assuming it was probably some type of IT personnel, I guess. I mean, I guess for that type of access.
That they impersonated?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe they said it was IT.
Okay. Yeah, because that makes a little more sense. I was like, well, that was kind of cool to get access. But if you guys depends on the access they have. So how did they negotiate that? So they must have had some pretty decent privilege. And I guess dual authentication, just guessing, probably was not available on that.
Either that or they bypassed it. So their next step was to get access into Okta.
Nice.
So they owned their Okta, which was really their biggest downfall because they kept trying to cut them off, but they had Okta.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna just point this out. It's this totally taking the side step. I like Okta a lot, but holy shit, man! Like when we decided to put all of our keys in one basket, like LastPass, man, that's just it's like I get it, but it's kind of like that's what I would go for. It's like, hey, they have Okta. Let's stop working everywhere else, but just break into that. That's our number one focus.
Well, yeah, they're using Okta for their two-factor is a lot of what it is. So
that's pretty awesome.
So if you own Okta and you can just kill the two-factor and you don't need to...
Yeah. You bypass two-factor by clicking disabled.
Yeah, effectively.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So I guess from that, was it a ransomware attack? Was it APT? What do you think?
So what thankfully we know because they said... So they started to realize that they were breached and they started to shut down systems. And then the actors were like, hey, guys, yeah, we got you. Cut it out. And then they began trying to clean up their stuff rather than working with them, which is typically what I would encourage people to do. But they didn't do it very well. Then again, I don't want to say they didn't do it well. In a company that size with that type of infrastructure, it's got to be hard. You can't pull the firewall out of the internet. It's complicated. It's not that simple.
I was kind of surprised though, like internally, that they wouldn't have that. Like, again, this is probably perfect world. Donovan doesn't exist anymore, but like they got breached internally. That's fine. You figure they could have it's interesting to me how everything collapsed, even their machines internally. And I'm like, so if that's the case, I mean, they still had to have internet connection, or they didn't have like a dark fiber connection from building to building because their machines went down. So I guess they need internet for those to run.
Well, they began shutting stuff down to try and save it whenever they were scared and not really sure what was happening.
So you think most of the air quotes damage was from MGM?
No.
Okay.
So then they started trying to resume business thinking they were good, but because they had Okta, they couldn't really do shit. So
gotcha.
They, at that point, then they deployed ransomware.
Awesome.
And MGM didn't want to pay. It was, the whole deal.
Yeah. Do we ever figure out how much the ransomware was for?
I think they said $30 million for.
Pretty cheap.
For how much they do?
That's was like what, an hour? I don't know. I mean,
they said 8.5 a day. I think 8.5 million a day. This is what they make.
So I guess on that, like, if you were in their shoes and they asked for 30, if you could make that call, what would you have done?
Well, I don't know. It depends because at that point the damage is pretty much already done, especially publicly. So what data did they get, and how damaging is the data that they have? That's the question that needs to be made.
Right.
Can you function? Is there data that you don't have backups of that you have to have?
Right.
Is there data that is super, super damaging if it gets out?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was already so public at that point.
Yeah.
That they were in a bad spot.
So just again, we're just playing devil's advocate just because it's interesting because people don't know what it's like to be in that situation. Let's say that we don't know what data they have potentially stolen, but they have access and they're going to deploy ransomware unless you pay $15 million and you run 8 a day. What would you do?
I think of the best financial decision at that point. Well, you have to think about who you're talking to. Are they trustworthy? Everything like that.
Sure.
At that point, it's probably a better decision just to do it.
Yeah.
But
so I assume there's some steps before you just, because it is possible. I believe it or not, I know the FBI tells you to not pay ever because your company can collapse. Sometimes you're not in that position to let your company collapse.
So this is a great point. Did you know that Caesars got ransomware the same week?
I heard that, but I didn't know. I said there was speculation, but
nobody really knew.
So how did they
They paid.
Oh God. Okay.
So this is one example.
Yeah. So they had it. So they had it forehand, and had they not have paid, that's when it became public. I would imagine same kind of coincidence or steps with MGM, right?
Yeah.
So
Caesars, the speculation at this point, because the actors didn't come out and say this is exactly what we did. We don't know who it was.
Yeah.
But there's very strong evidence that they were breached and they did pay. And they did not suffer any serious downtimes. They had a small downtime.
So did Caesars have any customer or data leaked?
Not that is known.
Awesome. So
that's
two sides of the coin.
Yeah,
there's the decision tree.
90% of the time I'm going to tell people nah, don't pay, don't do it. But sometimes it works out better, I guess. So
sometimes
it's a really good example of when it not paying doesn't really work, and when paying does, I guess. But then again, what we don't know is maybe they left their hooks inside of Caesars, and maybe Caesars didn't repair all the way. Again, this is speculation.
I feel like this is a Mr. Robot episode.
None of this is defamatory towards Caesars or MGM. This is speculation.
Yeah.
So it could be possible that if they did pay and get ransomware, like people are saying, that they could come back. They might have some C2 left in there where they've just got a couple of nodes scattered through, and
or maybe if they did in honor, which honor amongst thieves, we'll see. They did remove. They could still have some type of hook that they just didn't uninstall or something, and someone else could grab that, right?
That's totally possible.
Mm-hmm.
That has happened. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. With modern C2s, it's a lot harder to have that happen.
Yeah.
Back in the day, that was a fairly common thing.
Yeah.
For someone to be using something, some of the older Trojans, I hesitate to even call it a C2, but they were basically pre-C2.
Yeah.
But some of those older ones, people would leave them default settings and they would just connect to whatever.
Yeah.
I remember spinning those up back in the day, and you would fire the default settings on it, and you would see all kinds of stuff start populating whenever you would just scan for IPs. And it was just what is this? Because people would just start infecting stuff without changing anything.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. I'm that technically old, which is when I started testing at my house in my home lab.
Yes.
With NetBus.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, everything is port 1, 2, 3, 4. This is hilarious. Yeah. It still exists.
I remember seeing that with NetBus Sub 7.
Sub 7.
Rufus. Shout out Cult of the Dead Cow. You guys still rock.
Yep. No doubt. Man, that's awesome. So kind of going through that, that's a good observation. So on MGM's pretty loud about that. Caesars. So can you explain to the audience, well, how did that happen? How do you even pay ransomware? So they got ransomware, or the threat of, we don't really know the details of it, but how do you do that? Like, you just promissory note, maybe they got some free players cards or something. Players points.
They could. It's possible.
I would have asked for it, would never used it, but
they being that they are a casino, which is effectively a financial institution, they could have had some other ways that we don't know about.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about typically how it goes. So usually your first poor soul in the help desk comes in early before anybody else, and they start having their phone blow up about how nothing works. I can't access files on the share. The share is broken. Email's broken. The internet is broken.
The internet's down.
The internet is down. The moon fell out of the sky.
That's right.
But they start, and then of course that takes a while, usually an hour or so, to start getting blown up to level 2 IT admins, whoever.
Yep.
And then usually it takes too long. It's usually a couple of hours before people are like, we all have these README files on our desktop. What is this? That's of course how you know, yeah, you're ransomware. That's the telltale sign. Most of the actors still do that.
Leaving love letters.
Yeah. So it'll read me. You've been ransomwared by so and so. That's another thing. Tangent. Come back. Tangent. Whenever people spend so long trying to figure out who ransomwared them, what are the IoT? What are the IOCs that we have? How can we tell that they compromised? Does this match up with this actor?
Yeah.
Read the damn README. 99% of the time, it will say who it was, and they will tell you where to go.
We have had a few of those occasions where they assumed who it was, and they were 100% incorrect.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that happened, but you're right. Like, we just need the ransom files. Like, oh, we don't have it anymore because we deleted it. I'm like, what?
That's how I start looking for IOCs most of the time.
Yeah, because
I look at the ransom file, and then from there I check IOCs to see if it matches, and that's really them.
Right.
So far, 100% of the time it has been.
Typically, I mean, also people aren't aware is you can, even if you had, there are some IOCs you're talking about, just even IP addresses that are available. Are you seeing data go to these IPs? Check the firewall. Yes or no. And again, it's in the README file is kind of where it's at. So don't delete it. It's you're already owned anyway. Just please don't, because we've had customers.
Well, don't modify anything. Don't do anything.
Yeah, don't, because we've had people just once they found out they get ransomware, they start just deleting everything, and like, I don't know, trying to. It's the what is it? They're in the denial phase.
Well, you're trying to clean it like it's a virus on Windows XP.
Yeah. Right click. Does that not work?
Yeah. So, yeah, don't touch anything. It's a forensic investigation. Okay,
Right.
but let's come back. Keep myself on track.
Yeah. So how do we pay for that? How does that communication even work?
So the ransomware note will say, "Come talk to us here." They'll give you a link where you can go on XMPP or Talks and talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they just give you a crypto wallet, kind of the older method of doing it.
Yeah.
Hey, here's the crypto wallet. Come transfer your funds here.
So it's like a Tor webpage?
Usually,
Okay.
yes. Usually it'll be a Tor webpage, and it'll, like I said, it'll Talks or XMPP chat where you can talk to them. And then, you'll have, like, let's use Lockbit for an example, because those guys are great minus chain criminals, but they're pretty cool.
Appreciate the intellectual battle they have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't appreciate their crime.
They're pretty cool. They are. They don't target, hospitals or anything that's bad, and like, whenever a hospital got ransomware, they helped them to recover, and like they've done some cool stuff, but they still are criminals at the end of the day. So as a hacker, I'm like, I'm conflicted. I'm like, you're a scumbag, but I also like you.
I appreciate your scumbaggy art. You're a beautiful, ugly person. Thank you for all your efforts.
Basically. Anyways.
So it's like a web page, like generic.
So yeah, you fire up Tor, you browse to their Tor site, and on Lockbit's site, they have FAQs, they have a wiki, they have here's how you pay, here's how you do this stuff. If there's anything broken from, so they you can get in their chat, you talk to their people, and they say, here's how much it costs. With smaller ransomware groups, you can usually negotiate, and we can talk about negotiating more.
Yeah.
A lot of these bigger ones, they're a corporation. These guys are showing up in an office and punching a clock. Like, I mean, they're not going to deviate from their policy. Their policy might say, under X circumstances, you can negotiate X amount. And a lot of them, the way they do it is they'll say, you can negotiate up to this percentage. You can look at, if you get their insurance policy, things change. You target how much their insurance policy pays. So if you're talking to them and they say, we know you have X insurance, we know they pay this, you're screwed, that's what you have to pay. They're not going to budge.
$6 million.
If that's what it pays out.
So typically a decent standard. I would say this year that's happened a ton.
Yeah.
So just kind of wrapping up for the audience, like, we're literally talking about going on Tor. So that's, if people aren't aware of that, it's the Onion. It's, quote, the dark web, fingers quotes, whatever you want to call it. And it's a link to an encrypted web page with an encrypted chat to actual attackers. Probably not the front end, like I'll call them the technical. These are like the help desk people you're talking to.
Yes.
So you have probably an intellectual advantage. Sometimes they're unaware of what exactly they have access to. Not all the time, sometime. And I would just give one of my examples that when I jump on, it says, hey, you've activated this whatnot. And And so it starts kind of the conversation automatically. And then it says, hey, we have compromised 15 servers. Each one will cost you $1 million or whatever the going rate is at that time. And at that point, you can start chatting with them. Have you, I know you have, but like, tell me about that in exchange. How does that work?
Yeah. So on negotiating like that type of thing, a lot of the times you'll say, they'll start off and they kind of give information to prove it's them usually. Hey, we have access to X amount of your devices. We have this domain.
Mm-hmm.
We have traffic coming from these sites if you have multiple sites, and they'll just make sure that like, hey, we've got everything.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't. More often than not, they do, because usually people they get a domain admin and they push it out through the domain. Everything's domain joined.
Right.
A lot of the times, kind of an aside, I'm good at those today. A lot of the times what we see is non-domain joined stuff is not touched, which is always interesting to see. But anyways, they'll push out through the domain. They'll hit everything there, and they'll let you know what they have. So sometimes you can use that to your advantage and go. Hey,
so I know where you're going, but like, so what if I'm just like an IT guy, and have you ever? Well, I've seen an instance, and I'll ask a question, is where before you start just going full bore into it, and we got to get the machines back on. I'm talking to a tech group from like 1 to 5. Let's say they want to pay it. Before you pay it, you make sure you validate it, because we work for has a few that they were. Yes. I would even call them poser ransomware teams.
Yeah. That
it appeared that you were ransomware, fingers quote, and you actually weren't, which is insane that somebody would pay that, because stuff was they just kind of broke some things, so nothing was encrypted.
Mass change the file extension for everything where it broke all the files.
Boom.
And you just had to mass change file extensions back.
Yeah, right. And then the other one was about validating it. Like, how do you, if like...
So that's something we've done a lot. It used to work better than it does now because they've really caught on. But a lot of the times what you could do is you could say, hey, I need to validate that you can decrypt this file. You say, hey, I'm going to send you a file. I have to make sure your decryptor works. And a lot of the times you could send them something that's low-key kind of important.
Yeah.
That you need. Send them any kind of spreadsheet that you need, as long as it's not obvious that you need it, because they might tell you no. But then they would decrypt it, send it back for proof.
Yeah.
That's always good. And I've even extorted that a little bit, where I've said, hey, this file's still broken. How do I, this file clearly doesn't work. And they say, no, it works fine. And I'd say, look, here's another file, prove it on this one. And I've gotten that up to like 3 different files to get some important spreadsheets back.
Yeah, that they needed to help continue, or running payroll was a hook for one of those. So you could use that to your advantage as well.
Back in the day. Now, let me tell you how Lockbit does it.
Go ahead.
We're using them as an example for a lot. So they have a web page that you upload to, and it will decrypt. You upload, they give you a key that's basically your customer ID.
Oh, nice.
You plug in your customer ID, and it will decrypt for you. It will say, here's your decryption. And it only does very small files. So you can't send...
So it has a limit on it.
Very small.
Okay.
Very small.
Okay.
It's really just example files to prove that it works.
Yeah.
And it always does with those guys, I'm sure. But
yeah, and also there was the group I did out of Brazil, which was very strange, and that was the one. It was like, you worked on that one too. It was like $1,000.
Yes.
So that I don't know if that was like some weird copycat, but as soon as I saw it with $1,000, I was like, pay it, pay all of it. And by the way, that's very rare. I would say that's the first time I've seen. I think that was the lowest ransomware I've seen in my entire career. Don't know what that was about, but
and they didn't have backups. The company didn't have.
They didn't have backups,
and it was like, dude, it's $1,000. Take that gamble. See if they can get you your file.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you said on there we can talk to them. What other? So you had the web page we talked about. I'm just being generic for the crowd. What other avenues that they chat, or is that typically how it works?
Yeah, some of them will tell you to join a Telegram. But I'm seeing much more of the XMPP talks chat stuff. Some people, I think I've even seen Signal used, which is pretty strange because it's like, it's your mobile phone and stuff. A lot of people don't like that.
Right.
Telegram's pretty popular still, but I think more often than not, they're on a Tor site where you can use their XMPP through it.
Is Telegram, is that authenticated just through like an email address? Is that your key? I know Signal's like,
you can set it up with I think you can do logins, or you can associate those to a phone number or an email.
okay. I didn't know if you knew. You could just be like, I don't know. That's
I
fine.
use the crap out of Telegram, but I'm trying to remember on the setup. It's been a minute since I've actually like set up an account.
Gotcha. Fair enough. Okay, so kind of recapping. So we got defining APT and ransomware, talked about different attacks, talked about negotiations, like kind of some tactics around that. We talked about maybe getting some free work out of them, depending on who the attacker is. If you can get some files back, which you said, also fake ransomware. We haven't talked about like if you do agree and someone wants to pay this, like how do you pay them, and how easy is it to get $5 million in Bitcoin?
Not. So a lot of the bigger ones have brokers that you can work through now. So if you use any of the bigger ones, if you're using Clop or Lockbit or whoever that's a notable large ransomware group, they will hook you up with brokers to help facilitate transactions.
That is so kind of them.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's amazing working with those guys. Like they have better customer support than half of the companies I've worked with in my general day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Like they're on the ball. They are professional acting, which is hilarious for criminals. It's a really wild thing to see your first few times.
I've never been verbally assaulted by them ever.
Oh, I have. Not like the professional ones, but yeah, no, we would talk absolute massive crap. So like, yeah, whenever we were trying to negotiate.
I feel like a year and a half ago, it was pretty hot. Like,
yeah,
I feel like that was what I call the splinter from Conti. I feel like there was like Conti, and then they splintered, and a whole bunch of noobs started ransomware, and those were the not professionals.
Yeah, probably, yeah. And even back before that, there were ones that were, they just tell you, email me on this random Gmail address. And you're like, okay. But yeah, no, we would talk massive crap back and forth where I would be like, they would use that as negotiation, where I would start saying, you guys are clearly amateurs. You didn't even do X, Y, Z. I was able to do this. Did you even change the padding on your decryptor? And like, just I would talk massive crap to them, and they would definitely return it. And I learned a lot of Russian cursing. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty interesting world. So again, it's always important if you guys do, fortunately get ransomware, just doing some key points before we move on to some next topics, is make sure you do read the README. I know that's like you admitting you got owned, and it's pretty terrifying, and you're literally, everyone's screaming in your face because the internet's down. That doesn't help anything. I always say take a deep breath, breathe, and start top to bottom. Who is it? What do they want? Are we actually breached? Start there, because a lot of people will race to step number 8 as opposed to going through that. And that's a lot easier said than done. We're kind of jaded by that these days. We come in and everyone's like screaming and upset. And most of the time, you guys have already been working, I don't know, a week on it.
Yeah.
And you're like, we should call Alias. I'm like, and you call us every Friday afternoon for the record. Maybe because you guys are done and you've realized you haven't slept for many a days. So just kind of take that back. And this is a little sidestep is, make sure before this happens, always prepare. Even I would say a tabletop exercise, going through that emotional roller coaster is super important when it comes to a ransomware exercise.
Yeah. Have your playbooks, have your IR playbooks, have your policies, everything ready to go. Do a tabletop to verify those, because that's what a tabletop is for. So you're right. You do your patching. How do you verify your patching? You do a vuln scan.
Yeah.
That's how you verify your patching process. How do you know you got everything? You do a pen test. Cool. Now, how do you do IR policy? Well, first off, you write your policy, and then you have somebody audit the policy, make sure it's all good, and then you do your tabletop. It's very much the same thing on the GRC side. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the, I feel like the world is getting there and learning more about that, but I think it's that last tabletop exercise of what they need. It's our favorite part is, again, kind of stepping aside we're continuing about ransomware is, okay, so we do have a ransomware. We're a company, I don't know, we'll just say what we make, $1 million a day, and the ransomware team wants $5 million to fully restore the environment. What are we doing? And that should be in there. Are we paying, or who makes that decision? Right. And if we are paying, how does that translate to insurance? Has anyone even deviated any of that? And also, if you do get breached, who are you going to call? Are you going to take care of it? Maybe you have the staff that can do that. Maybe they're trained for that. or maybe you need a third party to come in and help you facilitate that may work more of these in their career. So just want to talk about that. So tabletop exercise is something super important. I guess kind of going back to ransomware, is there anything kind of new and leading techniques you've seen kind of coming out that the audience should be looking for, or you think is going to make the news soon?
One thing that I thought was super interesting, going back to the README files actually, is I have seen an exe and an HTML file README in the last 6 months, and they have both been reinfections. Like, they have both actually had malware.
That's super rude.
Yes, it is. Most READMEs are text files for those of you who are fortunate enough to not be aware.
Yeah. And that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
HTML, that's super funny.
Yeah.
So I was my big conspiracy for the future, which I think is going to happen, is like how would people utilize? I got to do the official. How are people going to utilize ChatGPT when it comes to utilizing ransomware? If you could do it, what would you do? There you go.
Well, they've put some really good protections in. It's getting harder and harder every day to make ChatGPT do what you want whenever you're a hacker. It gets to the point where, as just doing security research and stuff, I use it a lot, and it's gotten to a point where I'm like not hardly using it because they have it's such a nanny now. It doesn't want you to do all the things. Thankfully, there are things like Worm GPT, and I think, what is it called, Evil GPT or something like that. But
I haven't heard of that. But
yeah, whenever Worm GPT came out, they were like, "We are for cybercrime," and they have since backpedaled, and they're like, "We're for security research."
Wow.
But
okay.
It was funny whenever that first came out. It still gives examples of like, write me a phishing email that does XYZ, and they'll like this is their examples. So
that's great.
Yeah, I haven't used it yet. I would love to get a subscription.
Do you think that type of intellectual tech, I guess, reach, and having that I mean, you talk about building that from scratch from something that takes many years of experience, and actually to make it be successful, that takes some time. Do you think that will increase criminals these days? Do you think that thing could scale up, or is that just people are just kind of worried about it? Because I've heard people worried about it, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'll just kind of get your opinion.
No, I don't think that a lot of it, because all ChatGPT does is look through internet or any large language model. I don't want to say ChatGPT, any large language model.
Uh-huh.
It looks through basically a big archive of, I know these things from the internet.
Yeah.
If it's already on the internet, it's already data people can find.
Yeah.
It's basically a really good search engine that summarizes really well.
Okay.
So it's nothing that you couldn't already find. I don't think that it's going to, it might speed things up. It'll definitely change some things, but I don't think that there's going to be many people who are capable of making and pushing out ransomware and such that are going to do it with GPT that wouldn't before.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong.
Okay. Well, we went through the scale of ransomware, README file, identifying attackers, negotiating, what to do, what not to do, a little bit outside in the chat GPT. Is there any other thing you want to highlight, or last topics?
I think that pretty much covers everything I had in my mind.
Yeah, same. So, again, just on the ransomware stuff, I like to always address the audience. If you do get ransomware, it is always important, again, to pause and even reach out to people, whether that's us or some other company, because that can be what those initial moves can dictate on how the rest of the engagement's going to go. So always maybe get some help, even just reaching out a phone call to people. That sounds silly, but and it is embarrassing. I get it. No one wants to do that walk of shame because, air quotes, you weren't secure enough or you're not good enough as an IT person. Again, you're dealing with people that do this for a living. So recognize the attacker and get yourself some help before you make the wrong decision, and it could potentially take down your company forever.
It's not as embarrassing as being down for 4 weeks and then getting fired.
Yes. And they made you work that whole month and hey, you're an idiot. You have to go. So, and again, one of my always jokes is, once you get ransomware, step one, print your resume. Just kidding. Just make a phone call. But I'm telling you, that's how kind of scary these can be, is because sometimes people do lose their job sometimes it wasn't even their fault. We know some of the other people that
I'd really love to throw them under the bus, but I won't call them out.
Good. So, so it can happen. It's really tough to defend against 0 days. typically impossible. But if you have a plan, you can at least say, hey, this was an impossible attack. It's just like you can have a house that you lock your doors, you lock your windows, you even have blinds or whatever. You have an alarm system, and they just ran into your house with a tank.
Right.
So, we didn't plan for tank, but so that's your 0 day. So how do we plan for tank? You can't always plan for everything, but you can have a plan in place if this 0 day tank happens. We have these policies we've already walked through in a team. We've all agreed this is the best steps we're going to do. We're all on the same page. It's a really good exercise, plus it's a good CYA for your job.
Yeah, for sure.
So just kind of wrapping up here. I hope that was super informative for the audience today. It's so good to see and chat with you guys again. We do get requests sometimes, so if you have some other topics we can talk about, please let me know. It's great to see you guys again, and thank you for listening to SecureAF Podcast.
Thanks, everybody.